The first time many people walk into Harbor Freight, it almost feels unreal. Prices so low they make you stop and look twice. And for years, that had been the reason millions of homeowners and dads kept coming back. But in 2026, even with the discounts still hanging everywhere, something different is happening. People who used to shop there all the time are beginning to pause before grabbing tools off the shelf. Across job sites and online forums, the same uneasy reaction towards the store keeps coming up. And once you start hearing the reasons, it becomes hard to ignore them. In this video, we're going to take a closer look at what many buyers are starting to notice about Harbor Freight in 2026, and why a growing number of shoppers are quietly rethinking how they buy their tools. Cheap tools that break too soon. One of the first complaints you start hearing from longtime Harbor Freight shoppers sounds very simple. The tool works fine at first, but it doesn't last as long as people expect. For many homeowners, the first few uses usually go well. A ratchet turns bolts smoothly. A drill handles small projects around the house. Everything feels like a great deal because the price was so low. But after a short time, problems sometimes begin to appear. A socket starts slipping under pressure. A ratchet no longer grips as tightly as it did before. A power tool begins struggling during tougher work. Now, to be fair, Harbor Freight sells tools at a wide range of price points, and not every product has this issue. But the complaints tend to follow a pattern. The cheaper the tool line, the more often buyers say they notice these kinds of problems. And that creates a frustrating situation for some people, because when a tool breaks sooner than expected, the buyer has two choices: try to repair it or go back and buy another one. And when that cycle repeats a few times, the cheap price that looked so attractive at the beginning suddenly starts feeling different. That is why, for many shoppers, the conversation is no longer just about price. It becomes about how long the tool actually lasts. And once people start thinking that way, the next issue becomes even harder to ignore. Tools that struggle on tough jobs. Another issue many shoppers begin noticing does not appear while standing in the aisle. It shows up later, when the tool finally faces a real job. Inside the store, everything looks solid. The tool feels balanced in your hand. The packaging promises enough power or strength to handle the task. For small household fixes, that is often true. Tightening a loose bolt, drilling a few holes, or assembling furniture usually goes smoothly. But when the job becomes tougher, that is when some buyers say the difference begins to appear. A rusted bolt refuses to move, and the ratchet begins slipping instead of gripping firmly. A drill that worked fine on light wood suddenly struggles when the material becomes thicker or harder. A wrench that looked strong on the shelf begins flexing when real pressure is applied. These moments often happen right in the middle of a project, when stopping is the last thing anyone wants to do. That is where frustration starts building. Because many people are not asking these tools to do extreme work. They are simply expecting them to handle the kinds of tasks tools are normally bought for. When a tool struggles during a basic repair, it leaves buyers wondering whether the tool was built for that job in the first place. And the problem is not always obvious at the beginning. During the first few uses, everything may feel fine. But as the workload increases, small weaknesses start revealing themselves. For homeowners working on weekend projects, this might mean the job takes longer than planned. For someone doing more regular repairs, it can mean stopping the project entirely to find another tool that can finish the work. After a few experiences like that, people begin remembering the pattern. The next time they walk through the store, they look at the tools differently. They test the weight, the grip, and the moving parts more carefully. Because once performance becomes a question, another detail naturally starts drawing attention: what the tool is actually made of. Weak metal. Inside some tools. One thing many experienced mechanics pay attention to is not the color of the tool or the brand printed on it. They pay attention to the metal, because when a tool fails, it is rarely because of how it looked on the shelf. It is usually because of what was inside it. At first glance, most tools look almost identical. A shiny chrome wrench from one brand can look very similar to a shiny chrome wrench from another. The same goes for sockets, ratchets, and breaker bars. In the store, under bright lights and clean packaging, the difference between them can be almost impossible to see, but the real difference appears when force is applied. Think about something as simple as loosening a bolt that has been stuck for years. That bolt may have rust around the threads, and it may have been tightened with a lot of torque. When you put a wrench on it and pull, all of that pressure travels directly through the metal of the tool. If the metal is strong, the tool stays firm. It holds the shape of the bolt head, grips properly, and transfers the force exactly where it needs to go. But if the metal is softer or thinner than it should be, small problems can start appearing. Sometimes the wrench opens slightly and loses its grip on the bolt. A socket may start rounding the edges of the nut instead of holding it tightly. A ratchet gear may slip under pressure, making that clicking sound when it should be turning the bolt. These small moments are what many buyers talk about when they describe the difference between tools. Online forums for mechanics and DIY repair are full of discussions where people compare experiences. Some say certain budget tools worked fine for simple tasks, but began struggling when they tried to use them on heavier jobs. Others mention sockets that cracked or ratchets that started slipping after repeated use. Again, this does not mean every tool at Harbor Freight has this issue. In fact, some of their newer product lines have built a strong reputation and are often compared with much more expensive brands. Lines like Icon and Hercules are frequently mentioned by buyers as better-built tools within the store. However, many of the concerns people raise tend to involve the cheapest tool lines, where the materials used may not always be as strong as what someone expects when they really lean on the tool. Once buyers begin noticing that difference in the metal, another concern naturally follows. Because if a tool struggles during real work, the next question is not just about performance. When returning the tool becomes part of the process. One thing many frequent Harbor Freight shoppers eventually notice is how normal the return counter becomes. If you visit many Harbor Freight stores, the return desk is rarely empty. Someone is exchanging a ratchet, someone else is returning a drill, and another customer is bringing back a tool that didn't perform the way they expected. To be fair, Harbor Freight actually has a very generous return policy. Most items can be returned within 90 days. Which gives buyers some confidence when trying a cheaper tool. But over time, some shoppers begin noticing something unusual. Returning tools becomes part of the routine. Instead of buying a tool and expecting it to stay in the toolbox for years, some buyers almost expect that they may have to bring it back at some point. Online forums and customer discussions often mention people keeping their receipts carefully, just in case something stops working sooner than expected. For example, someone might buy a budget ratchet set for a weekend project. If the ratchet begins slipping after a few uses, they know they can bring it back and exchange it. The same thing happens with certain power tools. If the motor struggles or stops working early, the buyer can return it and get another one. The policy works, and many people appreciate that. But for some shoppers, the real question becomes this: why is returning the tool something they have to think about in the first place? Driving back to the store, waiting in line, and replacing the tool can turn a simple purchase into a longer process than people expected. What started as a quick solution for a project can suddenly become another errand. And when buyers experience that a few times, it begins to shape how they shop. Some people start spending a little more money on tools they believe will last longer. Others begin researching tools more carefully before buying. And a few decide that certain tools are worth buying from stores known for stronger durability. Now, before we go any further, if you enjoy these kinds of honest breakdowns about tools and real buyer experiences, take a quick second to like the video and subscribe to the channel. It helps more people find the channel and keeps videos like this coming. Another concern naturally comes up: too many tool lines, too much confusion. One experience many Harbor Freight shoppers talk about is the moment they try to decide which version of a tool to buy. A person might simply want a ratchet, a drill, or a set of wrenches. It sounds like a straightforward purchase, but once they begin looking through the options, the decision can suddenly become more complicated than expected. Several tools that appear very similar are placed side by side. They may perform the same function and even look almost identical at first glance. The difference is the brand name printed on the packaging and the price attached to it. One might say Pittsburgh, another says Pittsburgh Pro. Then there is Icon. Nearby there might be Bauer, Warrior, or Hercules. To someone who already understands Harbor Freight's system, those names represent different levels of tools. But for many regular shoppers, especially those who do not follow tool discussions online, those brand names do not immediately explain what makes one tool different from the other. The result is hesitation. A buyer may stand there comparing two ratchets that look almost the same but have noticeably different prices. One might cost a little more. Another might cost quite a bit more. Without knowing what separates those lines, the choice can feel uncertain. Some people start checking the packaging closely, looking for small clues. Others pick up each tool, testing the grip or the weight in their hands, hoping to figure out which one feels stronger. A few may even pull out their phone and search for reviews before deciding. This happens because the different tool lines are designed for different types of users. Some are intended for lighter, occasional tasks around the house. Others are meant to handle more demanding work, but that distinction is not always obvious at first glance. Many experienced Harbor Freight shoppers eventually learn the differences over time. They figure out which brands within the store tend to perform better for the kinds of projects they do. After a while, they know exactly which label to look for. But reaching that point usually requires trial and error. Some buyers mention purchasing a tool thinking it belonged to a stronger line, only to later realize it was part of a more basic one. Others say they only understood the differences after reading online discussions where people compare the brands in detail. For someone who just needs a dependable tool quickly, that level of uncertainty can make the process feel unnecessarily complicated. Instead of confidently picking something up and moving on with the job, the buyer is left wondering whether they chose the right option. And once shoppers begin experiencing that confusion, another concern begins to follow. Because if the tool lines already feel difficult to navigate, people start wondering what happens when those lines change or disappear altogether. When popular tools suddenly disappear, one thing many tool users appreciate is consistency. When someone finds a tool that works well for them, they tend to stick with it. Maybe a certain ratchet fits perfectly in their hand, or a particular drill handles their projects without any problems. Once that trust is built, people often plan to buy the same tool again later. Sometimes it is for a second toolbox. Sometimes it is to replace one that has finally worn out after years of use. Other times, it is simply because they want to keep their tool sets matching. But this is where some Harbor Freight shoppers say they have run into an unexpected problem. The tool they liked is no longer there. Someone might remember buying a wrench set a few years earlier that worked great. When they decide to get another one, they go looking for the same set again. Instead of finding it, they see a completely different version with a new name or slightly different design. The same thing happens with certain power tools and accessories. A drill that performed well might later be replaced with an updated model under a different brand name. A socket set someone trusted may be replaced by another line that looks similar but is not exactly the same. For companies, updating products is normal. Businesses regularly improve designs, introduce new models, and phase out older ones. But for buyers who like sticking with tools they already know, these changes can make things harder. Instead of simply picking up the same tool again, the buyer now has to start comparing options all over again. They may wonder whether the new version performs the same way, or if it has changed in ways they cannot see immediately. This is something that comes up often in discussions among Harbor Freight customers. Some mention tools they liked years ago that they can no longer find. Others say certain product lines seem to change names or disappear entirely, which makes it harder to build a long-term set of tools from the same store. For someone who only buys a tool occasionally, this might not matter very much. But for people who work on projects regularly, consistency becomes important. Having tools that match, accessories that fit properly, and replacements that are easy to find makes repairs and maintenance much smoother. When those tools disappear or keep changing, it can make buyers feel uncertain about what they are investing in. And once that uncertainty appears, people naturally begin paying attention to something else as well. Not just the tools themselves, but how the overall reputation of the store has been shifting over time. Online reviews starts changing the conversation. Another thing that has quietly started influencing how people shop for tools today is something that did not matter nearly as much years ago: online reviews. In the past, many people bought tools simply based on what they saw in the store or what a friend recommended. If a tool looked strong and the price seemed reasonable, they would take it home and try it for themselves. That was often the end of the decision process. Today, process is very different. Before buying a tool, many people now take a moment to check what other buyers are saying. They open their phones and search for the tool online. They read customer reviews, scroll through discussion forums, or watch videos where mechanics and DIY users test tools and share their experiences. Sometimes, those reviews are very positive. People describe tools that performed far better than they expected. They talk about using them for months or even years without problems. Comments like that give buyers confidence that the tool will do what they need. But other times, the reviews create hesitation. A shopper might start reading comments and notice that experiences are very mixed. One person may say the tool worked perfectly for their project. Another person may describe a completely different experience where the tool stopped working sooner than expected. Seeing those different stories can make someone stop and think. It becomes difficult to know which experience will be their own. This kind of mixed feedback appears often in discussions about Harbor Freight tools, mainly because the store carries such a large number of different product lines and models. One specific tool may receive a lot of praise online, while another tool that looks similar may receive far more criticism. For someone researching before buying, that difference becomes important. Instead of simply choosing the first tool they see, buyers start digging deeper. They read multiple reviews. They compare opinions from different users. Some people even watch tool comparison videos to see how a Harbor Freight product performs next to tools from other brands. In many cases, that research helps buyers make a better decision. But for others, it can also introduce doubt. When someone repeatedly sees mixed opinions about tools from the same store, it can make them more cautious about where they spend their money. A purchase that once felt simple now requires more thought and more checking. And once buyers start approaching their purchases with that level of caution, another question naturally begins to appear. Not just about a single tool, but about the store itself. Has the place people once trusted for quick, reliable tool purchases started to feel different than it did before? When shoppers start comparing it to other stores? At first, Harbor Freight may have been the only place they considered for certain tools. It was convenient, familiar, and easy to stop by when something was needed for a project. For years, many homeowners and DIY users built large parts of their tool collections there. But as time goes on, people naturally begin comparing. Someone might visit another hardware store for a different item and notice the tool section. They start picking up tools, looking at the build, comparing the feel, and checking the prices. Sometimes the difference is small. Other times, it is enough to make them pause and think. This is where buying habits begin to shift. A person who once bought almost every tool from Harbor Freight may start spreading their purchases across different stores. Maybe they still buy certain tools there, but other tools are now coming from places like Home Depot, Lowe's, or specialty tool retailers. The reason is not always a single problem with Harbor Freight. Often, it is simply the result of comparison. When buyers see similar tools from multiple brands side by side, they begin thinking more carefully about what they want from their tools. Some focus on durability. Others think about warranties, brand reputation, or long-term reliability. And once people begin comparing options more closely, their buying decisions naturally become more selective. Many tool users say they still appreciate Harbor Freight for certain tools and accessories. The store continues to attract shoppers looking for convenient solutions and a wide range of equipment. But the moment buyers begin comparing every purchase against alternatives, the decision process changes. Instead of automatically heading to the same place every time, shoppers begin asking themselves a new question. Where is the best place to buy this particular tool? For some people, the answer is still Harbor Freight, but for others, that answer has slowly started to change. If you enjoyed this breakdown, please like the video and subscribe to the channel for more videos like this. And feel free to share your own Harbor Freight experiences in the comments.